I'm live. Okay, so let us add my guests. Okay, off we go and invite. Oh, hey, can you grab all the books for me? There's two of them on the couch, and there should be somewhere else.
Hi.
Hello! I'm in the process of inviting everybody.
Hi, guys.
Hello!
I think this is the first time I've ever been live on Instagram.
Really?
Yes.
Hey.
I'm using the
Okay.
ring light Jen got me.
Hey, and I'm using the same one.
Nice.
Welcome. Okay, I just invited Brendan, so I want to give Brendan a second to join. How y'all doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you guys doing? Love the hair.
Thank you.
I know, it is perfect here.
Yeah.
Thank you. But you can't really see mine. Oh, I should move, huh? Can you see my hair?
Yeah,
Down.
it's beautiful.
Here, let's give you some contrast. Hello.
Oh my God.
Okay, bird of paradise. Okay, bird of paradise. Love it.
Survive. Oh, that's beautiful.
Do love plants. I love plants so much. When we were coming up with the name for this show, we almost put plants in it. I was like, we can't have that many P's. It was like plants, Prosecco, politics.
Actually,
I was like, yeah, that's too much. Okay, so let's give folks a second to get in here. I'm going to silence my phone. That's something I'm also learning to do before I get into these conversations. And we're going to start off talking about whatever we're drinking. And anybody who's seen me do anything knows I'm probably also smoking. So we'll talk about that in a second. Cannabis don't have no peas in it. So we definitely was gonna be like, well, how do we include cannabis? It don't really, there's no peas.
Pot.
It's the plant.
So one of my teammates actually said pot, and I was like, you know what? It might. Here, so the secret subtitle is also plants and pot as well, because I'm doing all of them. Okay. Well, since we're all here and everyone's sound is fantastic, and everybody looks so wonderful, y'all so fine. I want to go ahead and get started because that means we have more time to talk to one another. So one thing I also want to do is make sure I have the books in hand. They're like floating around my house, and I think my partner is like in the process of going to find them. So we'll do that in a second. But first, what are y'all drinking on? What's everyone drinking? How's everyone feeling? What y'all got?
I'll start. I'm doing pineapple juice and tequila.
Yes.
Okay. It's just straight shooter.
You know.
Thank you. Who's your mother?
I have
What else you got?
I'm being boring tonight. I have green juice, just regular green juice. I drank a lot this week. So I'm like, let me bring it back for the weekend. Let me just ease into the weekend with some green juice.
You know what? I'm not even mad. I love the responsibility. What's your sign again? What's your sign?
Gemini, so you know it's hard. It's hard for me to feel that sense of responsibility, but I'm here.
It's okay. You're working at it, and I support you. Go, friend, go. Do it. What you drinking, Jordy?
I have a little Chardonnay.
Hey.
I almost did tequila as well, but it is 3:00 in California, which it's a little early, but I'm gonna start with a little Chardonnay.
Nobody here would have judged you, but I appreciate your honesty. Okay, so this is the inaugural Prosecco Pros and Politics, and so I actually went and got Prosecco. I was like, I'm gonna do it, and this is one of my favorites from our little local shop. It's a Santa Margarita. Can y'all see it? Santa Margarita.
Fancy.
I love it. So I'm gonna be and I even got my little cute glass out. Like I feel real snooty over here. I feel very elitist. You know?
Cheers.
Mm.
Cheers, everybody.
Okay. All right. So, and I'm also smoking because this is what I do. This is Alien Cookies. alien cookies and key lime cookies. Mm-hmm.
Delicious.
Wow. I can't smoke
So,
and do anything, so I'm in awe. I would be out. Be like, who are we talking to? What realm are you in right now? Mm-mm.
I'm from Oakland. This is like a basic entry level. How do I start my day? Okay. So since we're all here, we've talked about our beverages. I want to get started, and I want to have this really dope conversation with y'all tonight. And I'll start by introducing everyone and introducing the books that we're talking about today. So first, shout out to everybody who is on the live, who's in the audience right now. I appreciate y'all. Please go tell your friends to come join. Additionally, we are talking about 3 really incredible books tonight. Here they are. So the first is Black is the Body by Emily Bernard. We're talking about Lose Your Mother by Saidiya Hartman, and also Undrowned by Alexis Pauline Gumbs. We're going to have a couple questions for each person, but also a lot of questions for the entire group. And in this conversation, I think what I really want to emphasize is this is not supposed to be overly formal. We are just working through some really interesting topics, but also really focusing on the ways that Black feminist writers, Black queer writers have really invited us to know ourselves better. And to encounter these kind of edges of ourselves with other folks, other species, other races, all of that. So we'll talk about all of that tonight. To get started, I would like to introduce our illustrious panel. And it's so cute because it's like my best friend, a newish friend, and a brand new friend. We haven't even met in person yet, Forrest. So first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jordy Davies. Dr. Davies is currently a postdoctoral research associate at Johns Hopkins University and a recent graduate of the University of Chicago, where I also attended. We are homies from way back. Dr. Davies will be starting at UCI in the fall as an assistant professor because she is that bitch. Sorry.
Period.
My best friend. That's my best friend. We were in the same colors on accident. It really is. It's a mess. It's a mess. Also, she's a Taurus, and she always has perfect hair. So scrolling down. I always want to say Dr. Brendan Tynes because to me, I feel like you emote that you already done. So let's just claim it in the name of Jesus. Okay, on tonight. So Brendan Tynes is an incredible anthropologist and scholar who's really interested in thinking about the ways that non-binary, queer, and trans folks encounter patriarchy in the city of Baltimore. Brendan is also just a really dope individual. She does this really dope podcast called Laura's Daughters. Is that correct? Have we talked about this?
Thank you.
Okay. We have. And just all around really interesting work thinking about the intersections of race, gender, class, patriarchy, and the like. Okay. All right. So now to Forrest. We have never met, and I'm so excited. It was actually a teammate of mine, Irma Ishara, who was on. Thank you so much, Irma Ishara, who said you should have favorite librarian on. And I was like, okay, well, I'm already drawn in by the name, but I didn't know how much dope shit that you were actually doing as well. So in reading your bio, I saw that you're also currently a board of director member for the Atlanta Pride Association. Is this a thing?
Wow.
Didn't even know that we could just do that. I thought they had to get all the white folks to approve us first, but apparently they're letting Black folks do the shit we're supposed to be doing now. Hallelujah. That's super, super dope. Also a contributor for Gay Magazine, which is amazing. And on your Instagram the timeline, folks can learn about literally every book. Now, here's the thing that is important to me about this. I know that you're really focused on undereducation and literacy and all of that, especially in Black communities and in Low Country, which I didn't know what that was, so I had to Google it. Remember, I'm from California. So I was like, Low Country. And the academic was like, what counts as Low Country? And I think it's so important because when I was Googling, I found that actually Black folks who live in what's considered Low Country are some of the least likely to have access to reading materials and to information about our history and to, their own ancestry and all of that. So I think your work is super dope, and I would love to hear more about that as we progress. Did I miss anything?
No. I appreciate the introduction.
I think y'all are dope.
We
I
think
think y'all are
you're
dope.
dope, Jen
Thank
Jackson.
Yes.
Oh yes. Oh, hello
Thank
everyone.
you.
I am Jen Jackson.
Dr.
Um,
Jen Jackson,
I'm an
professor.
assistant professor at Syracuse University. I'm a political scientist. I study race and gender and trauma and social movements. I'm very tall and I smoke a lot of weed. Those are the things you need to know about me. If you see me on the street, don't say hi. I'm shy. Okay, so a couple things. First, when we talk about these books tonight, I want to invite folks in the chat to ask their questions, to engage, but also not to feel like they have to have already read the books to be involved in the conversation. These books are brought together with a little bit of a through line, and I'm going to go ahead and give a little bit of background and then start asking y'all some questions. So, Saidiya Hartman's Lose Your Mother is a really interesting story and a really great journey thinking about the ways that Black folk who are African descendants of slavery have navigated this kind of distance from their homeland. And in going back to Ghana, she kind of works through this process of seeking to find the remnants of slavery, the remnants of the transatlantic slave trade. And she finds so much more than that. She finds her own kind of foreigner status there very, very overtly. She also finds the ways that slavery and the propertyness of Blackness has kind of been subverted in day-to-day life and how it's just under the surface everywhere she goes. So it's a really interesting story, but also really, really, I think, reminiscent of the ways a lot of Black folks in the U.S. navigate their connection or disconnection from the diaspora, and that kind of tension that we all have at least at one point in our lives probably talked about. The next book, Thinking About Undrowned by Alexis Pauline Gumbs, is such a cool story. And it's so interesting. So I feel like I keep saying interesting, maybe because at least these first two books, I was surprised by. I like to read the books without knowing too much about what they're going to be about on the inside. I like to read the outside and be done. I don't listen to other people's takes on them, so I just start with my own ascertainment of what's going to happen. This is when the weed starts kicking in and the Prosecco, y'all. So I've never had to do this while being crossfaded. So we're going to see how it goes.
We support you.
We working through it. It's going to be fun. This is the first one. But Undrowned is beautiful because what Alexis Pauline Gumbs is trying to get us to do is to see ourselves reflected in these other types of kinship models that come from marine mammals. And the first time I heard that, I was like, all right, it's going to be whimsy. But it moves beyond whimsy and asks us to not only think about marine mammals as part of a kinship framework for all of us, but also deeply connected to the folks we lost in the Middle Passage. And the way she wraps it around as a meditation is beautiful. So I really am glad we're talking about that tonight. And the last book, which I have different thoughts on, is Black is the Body. Oh yeah, we're gonna talk about it. Black is the Body, written by Emily Bernard, it's a very well-written book, but it kind of explores a part of Blackness that I don't typically engage with, which is the edge of Blackness that meets whiteness. And what a violent edge, right? What a sharp and jagged and violent edge. And I found myself very uncomfortable at times reading the book because of those encounters that kept coming up essay after essay. So I think I'm still digesting that, and I would love to talk through it with y'all because Black feminism contains multitudes, and we can all have different ways of digesting the words that we've read. Okay? All right. So let's get started. When y'all think about the three books we're talking about tonight, and the kind of thematics that I've mentioned here, what kind of draws them together. I'd love to hear from y'all about what stood out for you, what resonated with your own experiences. Jordy, you want to start us?
Sure. First, I want to say thanks to Jen for inviting all of us. This was a great kind of opportunity to read. I think we often get caught up in the work and sometimes just like having to like pause and read and engage something deeply is a real kind of blessing. Yeah. And then like what a wonderful group of books you pulled together, Jen. Like truly, I think the thing that draws me in about all of the books is, you know, the kind of centrality of like being a Black woman, like moving through the world, and like what it means to espouse your story, like what it means to like tell, you know, like say with power, like who you are. I don't think that that's about like representation. I think that that is about like reclaiming a sense of power for one's like place in the world. And you know, the one I was like most familiar with coming to this was Lose Your Mother, which I think, you know, is key central text for Black study today. I think this is where Hartman first espouses the phrase afterlife of slavery. And, you know, I think we're all kind of trying to catch up with like, what does that mean? What does that mean for the institutions that we engage with, right, every day in the United States as we kind of navigate the world as Black Americans in particular. And then Undrowned, you know, like you said, like full of whimsy, but also just like a real kind of like quiet power. And I think like that comes with, you know, this engagement with like the natural world, right? And, you know, earth sign, like that means a lot to me. You know, I really like appreciate like the poetics of that. And then Black is the Body, complicated, like you said. But I don't know, like you know, like I ride with her just a teeny bit because growing up Black in the South, a Black nerdy girl in the South, you know, my father is white, and like, you know, so, you know, you meet those edges of Blackness. Oh, I met them all the time, like in my house. I love my dad, he's a great man, whatever. Point being, you know, like it is complicated when you like, you know, live right there on the edge of it. Some of the shit that she does, I'm kind of like, what are you doing? But we'll get there. But as a teacher, right? Anyway, but I think, you know, what kind of is wonderful through all of them is the complexity of, you know, being Black, identifying as a woman, like being in the world, and like, you know, the complexity of that, and just like the power of one's story and like the discomfort of that. So I'll stop there. Yeah.
I love that. I appreciate that. Forrest, do you want to jump in?
Oh, yeah. Well, Black is the Body and Undrowned were probably my favorite of the selections, simply because of how it reiterated commitment of self, which is identity, your commitment to your community, and that cardinal points on your compass, navigating not only just social injustice, but your pursuits of healing, and how it's identified those when you see not only within your community, but other people of people of color spaces, and also her similarities that she identified in Undrowned, or excuse me, Alexis. But Black is the Body, I thought, was more of like a self-help guidance. And so with that, it provided like it elevated an awareness of self. That's my best perspective of that. But we can talk more.
Yes, it's complicated. Brendan.
Yeah, I would definitely say that I have complicated feelings about Black is the Body. Well, actually, I don't know if my feelings are complicated or if they're just how I feel. I can get more into that later, but I think thinking across all three of the texts, I saw this theme of ancestry and its intimate connection to Blackness, right? So this idea that being Black means that you are entering into the world without a kind of familial affiliation, right? Like the condition, I'm always thinking about, you know, the condition of the slave, right? And for those of us who are the enslaved descendants, how our condition is framed by this inability, right, to look at our lineage and say, okay, I started here, or this person could claim me. And so when I see across these three texts, right, is different ways of dealing with the question of what does it mean to be Black, and what does it mean to be an ancestor, and what does it mean to be, I would say, and we can talk about this. I think she imposes a kind of understanding of Black womanhood in her work that I don't actually necessarily see as something that's actually reflective of a Black womanhood that I would espouse. So we can talk about that. But I think that what is interesting about Undrowned is this unspooling of an ancestry that says, actually, we are not just thinking at the human level, right? Which a lot of our arguments in Black studies are always trying to think about how to include Black people as human, but to say the question is actually much larger and much deeper, and it's about our relationship with the earth. And so I think that Emily Bernard definitely takes ancestry and thinks about it singularly through herself, as you were saying, for it's like this kind of self position. And then I
Mhm.
think Saidiya is thinking across lineages, across peoples, across continents in ways that really question what does it mean to see yourself as an African
Yeah.
in a new place. So
Yeah.
yeah, I these are three really evocative texts. So I'm like
Absolutely.
trying not to
And I
say
feel like
everything in my notes.
no, I had an idea of how this was going to go beforehand, but I think I'm going to switch it up, and I think we should just start off talking about this book, and just kind of work through kind
The
of what we're
elephant in the
all
room.
right, what we're all alluding to, right? And so I think what everyone has said is exactly right, right? I think that there are ways that this is a very beautiful narrative because it's so vulnerable, it's so clear-headed and so astute in the way it's thinking about Blackness and the tethering of race to the physical body. I thought that was just so beautifully done, especially through such a horrible and traumatic story, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's I think it's the associations and the unraveling and the remaining kind of ways that pans out in the rest of the story for me that I was like, oh, right. So in talking about, for instance, the N word, right? That particular section was very hard for me because I'm like, yeah, there are certain ways that we confront that barrier, that line between whiteness and blackness, or whatever we're calling it, which I would actually call it blackness and anti-blackness, or like, something more overtly indicative of the nature of what we're talking about,
Mm,
right? Um, but there are ways that we don't have to confront it. We don't have to make choices that put us in direct communication and in direct contact with that violence. And I think that, right, there are the inevitables, the random, and I think that she does that really well when she talks about the things that are the ordinary life things. But then there are the things that we make choices about. And I just felt like some of the choices I was like, oh, that's an interesting choice. And I don't know that for me, I would be interested, for instance, in engaging with white people about saying nigga ever. Like
ever.
there's no part of my body or my being that's like, you know what I would like to do today? Talk to, excuse me, a room full of white people about the word nigga. Like there's no scenario. Like who wakes up in the morning and thinks to themselves that it would be fun um, to engage in that? Not me. So I think for me, it was less about whether this type of Black womanhood exists, because it does, right? It was more so for me about, do we honestly want to navigate a type of Blackness that is always cast up against a white background? Like, is that what we want to volunteer to do?
I can see that. Well, can I be devil's advocate to that?
Always, please do be.
As
Yes.
I read that book, the question that it posed throughout many of its things that it raised was, when we think about preservation, is that a form of gatekeeping to protect and preserve not only Black womanhood, but the essence of womanhood amongst its queer spectrum, and how those resonate and contribute to that? And if so, does that also involve a form of cancellation? Canceling is a trend that many people use, or a
Mhm.
movement, silence, or to censor those that they feel have too much contribution or visibility. For
Absolutely.
example, Michelle, um, or if you
I love this.
are Black, contribute to the complexities of how you the narrative of Blackness. So so my question to you all is, when you read Black is the Body, you believe that when we think about preservation of the Black woman identity, the narrative, does that involve a form of gatekeeping?
Mm.
I want to say yes to that. And I don't have a lot of complicated reasons why. But I suppose in thinking about some like Black feminist elders and like their protectiveness of like Black womanhood, especially in the face of like trans identity. I mean, Yes, is what I'd say to that. And I suppose I have a kind of different response to what I think Bernard is doing, though. Um, it seems like for her, like precarity is always sort of subsumed under, like within the existence of Blackness, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way she
Mm-hmm.
talks about the N word, she says, "Oh, is it there in their throat? You know, like is it on its way out?" And that kind of makes me think about like the essay, like where she's kind of like driving back to the South and like her husband pulls over to this different gas station than they normally pull over to, and the kind of like thin nature of like protectiveness, just like a different choice of a gas station. And so maybe, I don't know, maybe her kind of like goal here is to trouble like the like those boundaries that we think are so kind of safely in place, or that we like choose to put in place. Like, because if I'm running a classroom, we're not talking about that. You know what I mean? Like, I have been in the presence of white people as they like turn over the word nigga, and like, I'm like, oh my God, like I would never say that, or like I can't say that, or if I could come close to say, you know what I mean? I've been like, what the fuck, you know? And so I think like, you know, I think like her point is to get us like up to that boundary and be like, that boundary is never actually there. Like we're always already, you know, across, you know, that threshold in some ways. And I think that kind of shows like the like, you know, lack of certainty, right? Like all of the kind of ways we attempt to protect ourselves with identity, even with choices, and like how flimsy they can be, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I think your question, or what I saw in Black is the Body is not necessarily, I don't think Bernard is interested in a certain type of gatekeeping, because for her, that might not allow her to have this imagined, and I'm going to use the word imagine, I'm going to lay it on pretty strong here, this imagined access to white people. Right. So that's what I'm going to use the word imagine, and I'm just going to say that, right? So this idea, and part of what troubled me reading the work was, I was like, if I did not know that Emily Bernard was Black,
Yeah.
there are certain parts of this work, right, that would just read as, you know, some white woman writing about race, whatever the fuck that means. And so
Mm-hmm.
for me, I like went back to this quote that she has at the beginning, where she talks of, you know, she quotes James Baldwin, as saying
Yes.
that Black is a condition.
A
And
condition.
so, and I thought about that in kind of a constellation with, you know, Christina Sharp's assertion that anti-Blackness is the weather, right? It's the atmosphere, right? So if Blackness is a condition, then what might Bernard mean by condition? And so I looked up what condition means, because this is always kind of where I start in my thinking process. And so
Mm-hmm.
condition can have two meanings that are connected, but are actually kind of like, I think, fit aligned with what she's trying to do in this work. And so I found myself asking, is Bernard thinking of condition as a particular mode of being of a person or a thing? Or is she thinking of Blackness as a condition that is restricting, limiting, or modifying a circumstance?
Mm-hmm.
And if she's entering into Blackness as just a mode of being in existence, that is actually not how she is engaging with Blackness,
That's
especially her own
it.
Blackness,
That's
throughout the book,
it.
right? She's not thinking of it as, I am Black and I move through the world as Black. There are several points where she calls herself brown and says other people impose Blackness on me. And
That's
you
it.
know, the psychoanalyst in me is always like, okay, what psychically, what is it doing for you to not claim this identity, right? Does it allow you to adopt Black girls from Africa and say that you're not doing something that white folks do, right? While you are doing it with white folks and in community with white folks. Does it allow you to kind of sit and see yourself as someone who's provoking white teenagers, right? These college students to think about why they're comfortable saying the word nigger when you're not around, right? But in your presence, they feel like it's going to quote unquote annihilate you. And that's something that like that really troubles me. But I think it's because there's this kind of just to get back to your original point about gatekeeping. For us, like I don't think that the idea that we as Black people are gatekeeping Black identity is anything that's necessarily harmful or bad. I think that what's missing from this book, interestingly enough, even though it starts in a violent incident, is this kind of structural analysis of violence, right?
That's
Like,
it.
and Blackness's explicit connection to that.
That's it.
We cannot talk about being Black without talking about violence, and she talks about it in ways that where she tries to like distance herself from that, and it makes me very uncomfortable. And I'm going to shut up, but
listen, okay. I love that you be like, mic drop, mic drop, mic drop. Okay, I'm gonna shut up. Everything you said, absolutely that. And I think it comes through most clearly for me when she talks about the experience of being stabbed, and she says the knife didn't hurt, but the surgeon did, right?
When
and
poked the fingers, yep.
Right. And I understood, right, symbolically, and I understood as a writer what she was doing, but I also just yearned for there to be some analysis of the fact that this person that stabbed her was a white man, and he got to later apologize. He got to live through that incident and have a conversation about how he felt about the victims of his crime. And there was no interrogation of status and positionality and station, and the fact that this happened to her in New Haven, right? All these contextual factors that to me mattered, and she had no engagement, and that to me was disappointing, because I said, oh, this is going to happen right here, this is it, and it didn't. And I think that's where I realized, oh, this is a different project than what I thought might have been here. And that's all me.
Can I raise something really quick? I do wonder, like, one thing I feel like is really like powerful about this text is her vulnerability.
Yes.
And I think it's so important, like Brendan was saying, to be able to like point to structural problems in our writing. But part of, I feel like my affliction is that I'm a social scientist and I'm taught to write about systems, but I want to be able to be more vulnerable in my writing as well. So how can we kind of bring those two together? I suppose I think Jen is really good at doing both. But is there a way we think Bernard could have been as vulnerable as she was, and I don't know, but also have like a systematic like analysis? I would say yes, but I don't know, like, it's just I guess food for thought.
I mean, maybe we can talk about Lose Your Mother, because I think maybe that's an example of doing that.
Yes.
We want to
definitely
move to Lose Your Mother a bit. Okay.
Yeah,
so
I think
let's
talking
talk
across
about
the two would be cool too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how do we feel about the kind of yearning, the yearning for connectedness, the yearning for community, the yearning for kinship, and the journey that Hartman gives us in Lose Your Mother?
I think the first time I read Lose Your Mother was my first year in graduate school, which feels so fucking far away now. But what was that, like 2017? And that was my first time actually even encountering Saidiya's work. Like I read scenes, was thoroughly confused. Then went to Lose Your Mother. Someone was like, well, then read Lose Your Mother. It kind of reads differently. And so then I read Lose Your Mother, and it was my first time really, for me, confronting an idea of Pan-Africanness, and a sense of like, what does it truly mean to be, quote unquote, African American when you return to the motherland and they ultimately reject you. And that process of acceptance, but also that intense loneliness and alienation that I think she's able to articulate specifically through the Black woman's body.
Yes.
Like no one else would have had those, like she would not have had those experiences if she were not herself. So that's something that just right off the rip, I'm like, yeah, Lose Your Mother was something that I encountered and like changed the way I thought about Black relation and this kind of like ancestral relationship.
I love that. Jordy Forrest.
Can I ask you guys a question about Lose Your Mother? It reminded me its overall tone of almost like Invisible Man, with the female
Mm.
overtone, especially with the element of ability that I felt
Mm.
when I read it. It made me, if I were to pair it with any feeling, it reminded me of that feeling in middle school or being in predominantly white spaces, where I felt as I'm seen as a girl, or I'm seen as another body, but I'm not seen as a Black
You're not really
individual.
seeing. Yeah.
And even when I place myself in conscious efforts to be in Black-centered or minority-focused environments, how I walk through my identity in space, there's this element of invisibility even amongst
Absolutely.
not only but in my community. So I wanted to ask, did you all feel an element of invisibility in Lose Your Mother? Because I felt that. I was like, oh.
That's so good, Forrest. That's so good. Like what I feel and like the invisibility is such a good point, because there's that like that scene where she's like standing in the street and everyone is like passing her by and like not really paying her attention, except to be like, are you like, what are you doing?
Right.
But and I feel so much grief in Lose Your Mother, right? Like I think it is there's such a like sadness about it. And I think like, I don't know, I feel like kind of the same, like there's like Blackness, specifically like chattel slavery post like that Blackness in the Americas, like it's like an object in both Black is the Body and Lose Your Mother. They're both kind of turning Blackness over in their hands, and they're like, okay, like what is it? Like what is this experience? And then like the Hartman kind of goes back to the source, and she's like, how did all of this get started? And there's so much kind of, desire, right, to find a lineage, to find a belonging. And I think there's that same grief in Invisible Man.
Yes.
And so, yeah, no, I think that's a really wonderful comparison.
Yeah, and I would say I resonate. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say what stood out to me the most was chapter 5, the Tribe of the Middle Passage section. The folks who were descendants of folks who survived the Middle Passage. And I feel like that chapter, if it could stand alone as a kind of synopsis of the Black American experience, if I've ever read one. And I found it to be, in terms of thinking about resonances with my own life, or just like resonances with that feeling of like having survived, but the guilt of having survived. I feel like that chapter really conveys it. But yes, go ahead, Brendan.
I would just like small comment of just in thinking with Lose Your Mother, just as you were saying, Jordy, of how Blackness is an object for both Bernard and Hartman. I was just like, it's just really interesting to think about her experience as a Black woman in the place where Blackness, quote unquote, supposedly has originated, right? And feeling that sense of rejection, and ultimately having that reminder that actually the condition of Blackness, whether you see it as a state of being and something that is limiting, et cetera, it is something that was ultimately created and constructed, which means that our relationship to it is something that can also be created and constructed. That was like the biggest kind of like things for me, but that intense feeling of loneliness and seeing that on the page, and knowing that on my mother's side, I can go back to the Bahamas. On my father's side, I can go back to a small town in Louisiana, right? But and like that's where for me the ancestral kind of knowledge stops or ends. And knowing that across the Atlantic there are folks who are connected to me, but there's still that separation of Blackness that actually we didn't create for ourselves, but was created and imposed upon us. So that's really where where I left Lose Your Mother, just this thinking of like, what does it mean to be called into an identity that you cannot lose? Some of us can choose, but but like me myself, I cannot, right? So what does that actually mean for my body and how I move through the world? And like that's why I left Lose Your Mother, just really thinking about that.
Can we put those explicitly in conversation with one another? I really intrigued to hear how y'all think about what we just said with Black is the Body.
Ooh, okay.
Because
I think one place.
here's why I'm asking, right? I would argue that the same yearning is present in Black is the Body. I would argue that the same loneliness and the same desire to belong and all of that is absolutely present in Black is the Body. It's almost as if there's a different orientation to it or a different way of metabolizing it. But that's why I felt in Black is the Body, and it made me sad because I felt like it wasn't yet fully explored and engaged with. Like there was more. Whereas I feel like Lose Your Mother, Hartman's like, yeah, this is tough, and here's why, and she's very clear about it.
I think what becomes really apparent in Lose Your Mother is that Black belonging is not in a place. And I think Black is the Body, what kind of felt like absent from it for me is the fact that I think like our belonging, our heritage is like with each other, you know,
right?
Like that is like, you know, Black kinship, Black togetherness, like Black community, like that is, you know, that is where we find our ancestry, like that is where we find our togetherness. And I think like both of those books kind of point at it in different ways, by like, you know, its kind of absence in some ways in both of them.
Yeah.
Okay. For me, I definitely agree with you. Home is not a place, it's a feeling. And so the Lose Your Mother was catastrophic, especially being led by not ego in that sense, and the hunger for belonging. But Black is the Body. Yes, I felt uncomfortable what you mentioned about her detachedness to Blackness, because when you are attached in some sense, you have a sense of ownership to the healing, the understanding that you're pursuing. Yeah. And so when you detach from Blackness, you automatically subconsciously have a warrant to criticize.
That's right.
And to be not those that deteriorate the values and the cores and the principalities of what Black is and the complexities. So I felt not only uncomfortable, but that she was giving herself an excuse, and Black is the Body, to criticize Blackness in a way that she wasn't centering herself within the community. And that is how many White feminists view Blackness, especially when we look at the transracial and things like saviorship. There's a sense where I criticize, but my contribution, I want to look at how I can save this, or how I can view this, view that as a projection. But, you know, and let's say this, and that's where ground comes as a fulcrum, because her attachedness to nature allows us to see how centered, nature focused practices allow Black women a sense to breathe. So, celebration of breath work, and how not only marine life have a struggle, and how that represents our resilience to breath as Black people, because not only is it breathe in life, but figuratively in social justice. So when we look at that nuance of its similarity, these are tools that nature gives us to navigate.
That was really.
I don't even know. I want to throw a church fan or something. I can't.
Dropping such great points. I was like, yes.
I
feel
so good and so correct. God. Sorry, go ahead, John. Y'all so smart.
Yeah, I was gonna say, thinking with Bernard's connection to her own adopted daughter, and you know, on page 89, like I like reading this book, I was marking this book up, and I had several passages where I just literally wrote, "Girl, like what are you talking about? Like, girl, like what are you saying? What?"
Yes.
But then, so and me, as a darker skinned Black woman,
Mhm.
with my plus size body type, like
Mhm.
I don't have a and my explicit politic and just being around Black people, I don't necessarily have the privilege, and I'll name it as privilege, but I don't know if I really mean the word privilege in this moment, but like the privilege to sit and do that kind of distancing judgment work because my politic is so connected in the
Right.
healing.
Right.
But in like thinking about like how she looks at her daughters and she thinks of her daughters' connections to Africa as quote, it does not have to be fashioned or dramatized, invented or recuperated. It's a concrete reality to which many African Americans aspire, and that aspiration is represented in the term African American itself. So much of the complexity of being African American inheres in the fact that we are, in fact, Americans, products of this soil, yet rooted in something somewhere else. And so I think to get back to what you were saying, Jen, about this sense of yearning being in both works, I see that, but I see politically, and I don't know if Bernard would call this a political question, but I think politically, Bernard is invested in a different kind of yearning, not necessarily the yearning to be Black or to be African, but to be American. Where I think
Absolutely. Absolutely.
for Saidia, that's already like that's a foreclosed. That's a
Yes.
foreclosed possibility. Like the only way to belong is to go back, right? Not to
Yeah.
sit where we are now, right?
Yeah.
And then to know that going back, right? Going back by going to the present day Ghana, right, is actually, there's no way to go back, right? There's no return to the Middle Passage. There's no
Right.
return to the shores of Cape Coast. So where are
Right.
we? And
Yeah.
that to me is like really stunning to really think about.
Yeah. So I think that's really important, and I want to get us a Q&A, and I want us to talk about Undrowned. But I want to say one last thing that I think I want to draw them together before we move to Undrowned, and it's about this journey, right? I think you're right, Brendan, that there is kind of this universal. I think there's universal yearning. I think in a lot of ways for folks who sit at multiple margins of identity, whether it be for inclusion in comradeship and kinship with folks like us, or whether it be for some folks to assimilate or integrate or whatever that might be. I think what's interesting about each of these books is that there's a different orientation to the yearning. And I think that for Bernard, there's a sense of lamentation that's what made me feel sad and made me feel sympathy. And I think that for Hartman, the orientation to the yearning is a moment of an opportunity for healing, an opportunity for introspection, right? And I think for Gums, the yearning is a site of possibility and imagination and exploration, right? So while yearning is present in each of these projects, it's like a really interesting way of thinking about how we orient ourselves to Blackness and who we want to be in community, right? And how we want to show up in our bodies, right? And our orientation to our own flesh. But I like that I got to read these books together because I think it allowed me to see a really good kind of roadmap, right? To getting to a place where I can do that whimsy, that explorative, light-hearted orientation to my yearning. Because I don't know that I'm there yet.
Oh, I love that.
I love your truth with that. I don't know if I'm good either.
I'm not.
Yeah,
I know I'm not.
I think that I think when I think about yearning, I think about ancestry. It's particularly thinking about possibility. I don't know. I was like sweeping my floor earlier and thinking about like, wow, like my ancestors had to have enough hope and enough discipline of a hope for the future for me to be able to be sweeping the floor in my house right now. And so it's kind of yearning that something is going to be different for someone down the line, even if they cannot see it. And that is something that is, you know, that's an act of faith and a deep act of love that I'm still trying to wrap my mind around. And so yearning as a possibility versus a place that is like purely, you know, born of grief. And so maybe bringing grief into this conversation too, or grief is just another kind of like word for us to sit with, right? Like yearning's deep connection to loss and a recognition of loss, that just as a survivor of so many different violences, right? Sometimes I sit with loss much longer than I sit with the possibility of like my yearning becomes a negative thing versus like, oh, actually, no, this is an imagining of a future or like a kind of like hope for something more than what I have now.
Right. Well, I love that.
Yearning for me feels almost as an act of escapism, because it can feel almost miracle, almost as if it's not practical, because others have different standards of progress and definitions of how they measure it. And the work, although it's collective, others don't have the same methodologies, pursuits, or cores. As we talked about the boundaries of protecting identity, others have different boundaries or parameters of what they discuss. And what, as we talked about discussing the N-word, that's a nigga, and the use, or even that permittance. I'm going to discuss. I'll say you guys, I don't discuss history publicly with non-people of color because it's not my responsibility.
No,
it's
not.
Any level of assurance of the information you obtain, you need to conduct the work, and in my allowance, I may discuss that with you, because also this is Black and brown business. There are spaces where they warrant these conversations, but in my personal life, that's about myself. And so almost the yearning for me, because I'm not there yet, because grieving is a process, and yes, there is a loss. But for me, yearning, I have it for my healing to not internalize certain forms of violence that I've seen because of the trauma imagery we've seen with the Black Lives Matter, with a lot of big and targeted violence. So for me, I have to separate in order to see healing and progress for me.
Yearning and grief are such like vulnerable topics. Like I never would like think that I would talk about these things like in public, like given like, you know, I'm a political scientist, like, you know, I talk about politics. And so the easiest thing for me to talk about with yearning is about Black movement. Like it's the easiest thing for me is like yearning for another world, yearning for a world where all Black people are safe, yearning for, you know, like, you know, a world where we can all flourish, and where, you know, all queer Black people are safe and held, trans Black folks are, you know, held in like and safe, all of it. And so, but when I turn like yearning back on myself, like I don't know, like it feels so, I mean, like you were saying, Forrest, like it's like hard to kind of like reconcile that with like being practical, because I feel like being practical is the way that like we survive, right? Like the way that we like making practical decisions, like, okay, like this is how we move through the world, this is how we get through. I don't have to think about my yearning if I just think about the shit I have to do. I just do the shit I have to do. But oh my gosh, like if I sit with myself and I'm like, what do I yearn for? Like it's like, you know, green pastures, and it is, you know, a safe space, and like fucking like dogs running everywhere, and like children, and it is like, you know, the sweetest world like that I can imagine, right? And like I think I have to like step back and let myself yearn for like all the loveliness and beauty that I want, both for the world but also like for myself too. And like I guess grief, you know, I could say like kind of tied up in the same way, like, you know, I'm very kind of willing to engage with like, okay, like what are our political griefs, you know, like what are the ways that like we, you know, mourn for the world around us, you know, grief and some, but then I turn it back on myself, and like grief has been kind of like a specter for me, um, for reasons that I won't get into because I'll cry. But yeah, so what kind of like beautiful questions and like hard questions, and I will stop there. So.
Yeah, I just,
So
if I could interject really quickly,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, so as you were talking about yearning and your own yearning, it made me think about the fact that if we're yearning for a world where Black trans folks, Black queer folks will be free and free according to their own terms, um, that means that we actually have a fundamentally different yearning than most Black people, cis people, right? Or Black cis men, right?
Mhm.
So like Black cis men might have a yearning for power that looks like the way that white cis men dominate, right? Black cis women might have a particular yearning for a Black cis man in a particular kind of way that actually comes as a detriment to Black trans freedom and liberation. So I think what these three texts also allow us to do is kind of complicate that yearning and say that there's no one central Black yearning for something. But yeah, I think our goalposts for that yearning or that grief, the source of our grief and how we mobilize it, is something that's also good to think about too.
Okay, so can we tarry there for a moment? Because y'all keep dropping mics. So on this Trans Day of Visibility and this last day of International Women's History Month, I think that's a really important point, right? I think that that's something that Alexis Pauline Gumbs gets us to with Undrown. This possibility that our collective breathing, our synchronicity, our echolocation through our ancestral connections could get us to a place where we all might be yearning for the same thing because we're all yearning for collective breath, right? And I love how Gums writes about Blackness because her conception of Blackness is inherently queer. It's inherently trans. It's inherently non-binary, non-structured. It's not white supremacist in its orientation. It's not patriarchal. And so she has the ability to imagine an orientation to Blackness that's not tethered to any of the systems that already oppress us, right? Her conception of thinking of how we can be in community and solidarity during social movements by looking at marine mammals. I said, come on, girl, like you don't have to stunt on everybody like that all the time. Like everything you do don't have to be extra brilliant, but it works, right? It absolutely works. So I think what you're saying, Brendan, is so important. And I think that's something we have to continuously grapple with. What are we all yearning for, right? What are we collectively yearning for? And are we collectively yearning, right? Or are we each just kind of yearning for different things? And if that's the case, I think that we can think about Black as the Body as one part, right, of this very complete comprehensive Black experience and story, absolutely. But what we cannot do, I think, is stay there, right? I think we cannot stay there. I think the goal is to continue to work on that yearning to understand where it comes from and how we can heal through it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
What y'all think?
I agree with you. I think the yearning is important for a certain kind of imagination. I don't think that I yearn for the same world that Emily Bernard yearns for, and I think at times imagines herself to be living in. And I don't know, I think I'm going to sit and really reflect on this tonight as I journal of just like, yeah, what is the world that I yearn for? Because I know the world that I fight for, right?
Right.
What is actually the world that I yearn for, that the world that I'm grieving, that ancestral kind of knowledge, and then the world that I'm looking towards or looking to. Yeah. It's really evocative.
Yearning can go ways. I believe you can yearn to grieve a world that you cannot heal, or be a part of that is ancestry lineage and heritage, responsibility, or some of that weight of our ancestral responsibility. But the world that we envision should not look identical, but the cornerstone should have some of the same elements: liberation, visibility, equity. And this does not look different anywhere within the Black experience, regardless of how you identify, because these are pursuits of personhood. And to categorize them differently based upon how you identify means that your pursuit is not, in a sense, the same to arrive to an equal conclusion. We all want liberation. We all want equity, visibility. Like today is International Day of Tranquility.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
But it's also the last day of Women's History Month, which I think is just, it's tastefully done to include all intersections of
That's
women
it.
with it.
That's it.
Not a, and a Y.
That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. So we're going to open up for questions in a bit. I want to make sure I say that before we wrap up the panel discussion. I don't see any questions in the dialogue box yet, so I'm keeping track. So y'all please drop your questions. But I think to wrap up, if there's anything that you want the folks in the chat to take away from these books, from this conversation, how to apply these things in this political moment, what's that one thing that you would like folks to take away?
What I'll quickly say, just to start with Undrowned, like what's really lovely about it is this sort of maybe disregard is too strong, but I'll go there. Like, I think like she almost had like a disregard for like what, and maybe that's not right, but like what I'm trying to say is like she works within the kind of spaces of like, okay, colonialism has structured our world in this particular way, but never mind that. This is how I want to see the vastness and beauty of like the marine world and Blackness. And, you know, like, I don't know, there's like a bit where she's talking about a shark and she's like, oh, you know, they say you're dangerous. Like they say, you know, like, you know, there's like a violent reaction, right, to a shark. But I don't know, she like zeroes in on like the shark's strength, which I think is so like lovely, you know? And I think, I don't know, like I would think that we should be able to sort of proceed with like that kind of like curiosity and that kind of, there's like a hopefulness in it that I think is really beautiful. And I don't know, like I love a good dose of pessimism that's like all throughout like Lose Your Mother as well, but also the kind of fundamental like being led by like curiosity in that as well. And so I think that those are like just wonderful like kind of fundamental lessons from these works. And Black is the body. She's very vulnerable, which we appreciate.
I love that. Yeah. You like just to be balanced here. I feel that. Boris, Brandon.
I'll keep it short and sweet, like myself. I would say the importance of connection. Because you to not only center self-awareness, but to be aware of the systems around you and how you contribute or benefit from them beyond your understanding or your pursuit of the systems around you to dismantle them. So connection.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm really struggling here. I think that's because there's so many things I would like to say. And so my hope is that there are questions that will allow us to discuss some of these things. But I think for me, one of the things that I'm left of thinking across these three works is, what does it mean to keep pieces of oneself to oneself as a Black woman? And that is something, and like Jordy, when you brought up how Alexis says, yes, this is the way the world as such is structured, but here I am, right, outside of it, even though intimately with the knowledge that intimately like her body and also the bodies of other Black women structure that divide, right? And so I think about what Bernard is doing in some ways is like a survival technique, right? Of saying that culture of dissemblance
That's
that that ability to say, actually, I'm not going to share these pieces of myself, even
Right.
if you feel like
Right.
I'm sharing all of that.
Right.
And that comes through with and when Saidiya like travels through Ghana as well. And so I think I'm left thinking about that, right? Like, what does it mean to be vulnerable as a Black woman in a world that will almost always mean you harm? What do you choose to see? What do you choose to ignore? What do you choose to speak to? What do you choose to speak against? And I think for our audience, I would ask that question of like, of how is the work that you're doing allowing you to reach for the world that you yearn for? And what pieces of yourself are you having to open up or expose, and what pieces of yourself are you having to shy away from in order to do that? That's just what I would think about. Yeah.
Child, see, I know, but you just opened up a whole, we gotta have a part two. Yeah, so we do have a question about other recommendations for books. I'm looking right at you, Forrest. I know that you are a human anthology of Black feminists. I know. I'm looking behind you like I know it's something up there. Other books.
I would have to say Christina Cleveland, a brilliant friend, brilliant author. I would definitely have to say anything by E. Packer, for a Black author. He's one of the greatest contributors. Sweet Tea, Black Southern Women, Honey Pot, and Foundation. And I would have to say anything by Audre Lorde and Roxane Gray, of course.
Yes. Fantastic. Other folks, other recommendations?
I will quickly put a word in for, I have it right here. Oh, shoot. Oh. Black Women Writers at Work.
Oh, yes.
It is so wonderful. Like, I feel like, you know, it's just like all of our kind of figures, like Maya Angelou, Tamiki Rivera, Gwendolyn Brooks, Nikki Giovanni, like Audre Lorde, Toni Morrison. Like, it's just full of, I think, of Black women like reflecting on their writing practice, and it is really inspiring. And I don't know, I think it just kind of shows like writing as a way of like survival and the mode of like expression and work, and you know, everything that's kind of tied up in our writing.
Yes. Brandon?
Yes, that is
any
a
recommendations?
great recommendation.
I'm looking at my shelf right now.
I know. I'm like, I wish I were in. I don't want to show y'all the messiest room in my house, which is my office right now. So I'm like, I wish I were in my office so I could look at all of my books. But I think that if we're thinking about interiority, Black women, Black girls, Black trans folks, Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, that's idea.
I was gonna say that. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like really just in thinking about, and also different forms of writing. A book I just got today. I'm looking at it because it's sitting on my coffee table. Joy James. Which one is it? Is it In Pursuit of Revolutionary Love? That one I'm like, I just got mine today, and I'm like, I feel late. So
I need to get mine.
But Joy James, anything by Joy James, I feel like, particularly if we're thinking about the political, which is just one thing that I really wish Black is the Body. Like when I read that title, I was like, oh, we're getting into some
I was so
intergenerational political shit. And if the politics are there, but they're not explicit. And I think there's a particular way of Black being in white worlds where that kind of has to be your orientation to things. But like Joy James for me serves as one political compass, and especially in thinking of new worlds. And yeah, those are the two recommendations I'll give.
Okay, I'm pulling books off my shelf. Y'all said a few I was gonna say, but this is the book that Gums refers to, Revolutionary Mothering, and it's fantastic. It's just a really beautiful thing to read. But her particular entry in here on queer mothering and the potential of raising Black children as a queer process in and of itself is just fantastic. And then I just got this, Weathering. So the book is finally out. It's been like 30 years. We've been waiting to hear more about the weathering hypothesis, and the book finally came out this week. So this is Arlene Geronimus, and this is the original Weathering Hypothesis. Their family have a book. And always, I feel like there's always a reason to read Toni Morrison. This is her Racing Justice, Engendering Power book that I read frequently. I tend to go back to her the most. I think of most of my elders, I tend to go back to hers the most frequently. And I think that her work to connect her own position as a writer to conversations on feminism and all that were really overlooked, sadly. So she was out here theorizing, y'all. Theorizing. All right. So any other questions before we get ready to wrap up? Because I love giving Black people back their time. It's one of my favorite things to do, actually. So I just want to let y'all know. If the questions don't be busting, I'm going to free everybody and let them go drink some water and get sober. But I have another question for y'all also. Thinking about the through line, which was a narrative around yearning and kinship and comradeship. And this moment, I think you brought up earlier for us about cancellation and disposability and this orientation toward cancel culture. How do we mitigate the gap there, right? Where there seems to be this deep community and communal yearning for kinship, yearning for community and a place, but this orientation toward the individual that seems to be working in direct conflict with that.
I would say seek sisterhood and fraternity because it doesn't have an element of competition, and that when you uplift yourself in an identical fashion, you're able to uplift others. How you talk to self, that self-talk is the blueprint for how you can talk consciously. And that way, you say little things like, oh, I love me, I love that. You can also uplift others. So sisterhood and fraternity, because it has no element of competition.
I love that.
Forrest, I love how you emphasize that the way we talk to ourselves is how we relate with others, because that is so true. That is so true. And yeah, no, I would say the same thing. It's totally about, finding kinship and connection with other Black people. In particular, I think it is about fostering political spaces, fostering book clubs, political education, and also, when conflict happens, because it always does, conflict happens. It's a part of being human, a part of being in relation together, and a part of struggle. Keep coming back to the table. And, if you are in solid political relationship and solid familial relationship with your people, then you can and you should try to work through conflict. Yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, I think for me, what the path has always started, as Forrest said, kind of within, with the relationship to myself, but understanding that me and this body right here, right now, is not just, Brendan, Monique, Erica, Nicole times, right? It's not just me, the person that my mother brought forth into this world, but who I am is an instantiation of the hopes, the dreams, the wishes, the yearnings, the griefs of my ancestors. So building that ancestral connection and learning and kind of disavowing this white supremacist, anti-Black orientation that says that the individual is the main thing, is the prize, right? This kind of individualized sense of self is the prize, but actually know this connection to an ancestral community. And then also thinking not just people in the plane that we cannot see, but folks here in this plane, right? And building a sense of Black feminist community with them that is rooted in care, that's rooted in love. And also rooted in accountability, as you were talking about, Jordy, right? This idea that I cannot be who I am and move through the world and just not affect people and not be held accountable for that. And I think particularly when we think about Black liberation movements and who we hold accountable and for what and by whom, if we are yearning to live in a white world but just with a different skin color, then we're always going to have these issues where we are finding folks who quote unquote don't belong. But if we move our target from that to actually know we're creating a world that never was,
Mm-hmm.
but we want to always be, and that includes all of us. It requires a completely different orientation to what it means to be the self and what it means to like be in community with each other. And so I always I always just am like start within, start with the love of self, because I think as Black folks, we are so easy to reject ourselves in search for
Absolutely.
power and
Yeah.
capital. But then we have to move from that to what does it look like to actually be with each other in love, and not just hokey love, but like actual committed political love that may sometimes hurt. Yeah, so
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we have two questions. And I want to say one thing before we get to the questions. So the first one I can answer really quickly. But on that last note, I think it's so important if we look back to Gums and think about the ways that she also is encouraging us to listen to ourselves and to get back to this kind of sacred practice of understanding our own bodies and our own orientation to the earth as a way to navigate the world. I feel like that's exactly what she was asking us to do. Like, I feel like that's exactly how she envisioned a connection with community, is by first being centered in your body and grounded so that you can hear yourself, right? And hear the internalized kind of white supremacist messaging that has socialized us into gatekeeping, right? Has socialized us into anti-Blackness, and it has socialized us to be complicit in our own oppression. So that's that. The other question we got was, how do you find out more about the book club? Look up any hashtag Black Feminist Book Club. I'm on there somewhere. You can go to my website, jenmjackson.com. There's a tab there for the Black Feminist Book Club. Join my newsletter. You can go to the link tree in my profile on Instagram, and you'll find it there as well. So those are a couple ways to find it. Now, the question we got for you all was, do you have a recommendation for an order to read those books in that would help to, enhance folks' experience with the books, or maybe teach them a way to navigate what we're talking about here, yearning and community and all of that? I love every time you look back at the bookshelf, I get so excited. I'm like, what you gonna say? What's coming? What's on the bookshelf?
In addition to the beautiful selection that you have, beautiful selections, say Dear Black Girl.
Oh, yes.
From Your Sisters on Stepping Into Your Power by Sarah
Mm-hmm.
Winfrey. She has a follow-up to this, but your all suggestions were just brilliant. So I'm going to devour them first before I even share any of mine. That'll be my only one.
I love that. I love that.
I would say the order, like, I feel like the books go like Black is the Body is very sort of introspective. And then I would go like Lose Your Mother as like a kind of like turn towards like the diaspora.
Mm-hmm.
And then Undrowned, it sort of like links with Lose Your Mother through the kind of like water connection.
Mm-hmm.
And also it's just like, it's like this like cosmic, like universe kind of themed book. So
Yes.
I feel like perspective wise, that's how I would suggest to read the books.
yeah, I would say the same thing. I think I came to Lose Your Mother. I mean, obviously it's older book, so came to it first, then read Black is the Body, then read Undrowned actually for this. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
everyone's been talking about this book in the midst of dissertating. I don't want to read anything new, but I'm gonna push myself to read something new and actually fun. But Jordan, I think the way that you structured it is really perfect. That order, you kind of move from the self to the diaspora to this kind of like, actually we're part of a collective breath of a universe in a multiverse kind of move. So I would agree with that.
Me too.
I love that, y'all. Like, it makes me so excited because I had so many intentions when I chose the book list, but it don't be hitting until you hear from somebody else. You're like, I think I did a good job. But I feel good about this. Excellent. So any closing thoughts, remarks, questions that y'all want to share before we close out? I'm so excited to have our inaugural Prosecco Pros and Politics conversation. I have to keep doing that because we have so many P's. And plants and pot.
And pot.
Are y'all all plant people? Is everyone a plant person?
Yes.
See, I just, you know what? Okay, are y'all plant people? Like, should I feel any shame about how many plants I got? Or like, y'all got a lot of plants? How many
Oh, I
plants you
have a
got?
whole plant.
Forest?
I have a whole
Yes!
plant. Take
Okay.
y'all there, but I will.
Okay, 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 thank you. Okay, I feel affirmed. That's excellent. Okay, I'm the only one smoking pot. Who calls it pot? Don't nobody call it pot no more, do they?
Probably not.
Old folks.
Probably not.
Nobody calls it. Nobody calls it pot.
No,
It's okay.
I had
Any
a
closing?
substitute teacher who would call it Mary Joanna. And so that's what I call it in my head, Mary Joanna.
Okay, first of all, I say that all the time. I say that to my kids. I'm like, hand me my marijuana. And I say
Oh Lord.
marijuana. I might zhuzh it up from time to time. You know what I'm
Oh
saying?
my
But
goodness.
I definitely say that. That makes complete sense. I don't know why y'all making it sound like it's weird. Anyway, anyway. Any closing thoughts, y'all? Anything y'all would like to share with the audience, folks? Drop your stuff. So like hit us with some links. Thank you, Irma Ishara. Irma Ishara said they say it the same way. See, I knew, and they're tourists. Drop your links. So I know, Jordy, you have a new newsletter that you should share. Share that with us.
Yes, yes. I'll quit. Just closing thoughts, and then my newsletter. Like, I just want to say thank you, Jen. Like, I'll do this with you anytime, friend.
Mhm,
Like, this
mhm.
was so fun. Like, Black feminist literature is so important,
Mhm.
and it is political. It is introspective. Like if I see our friend Fernando has joined. Hi, Fernando.
Hey, Fernando.
Like if you're a professor, if you are a teacher in any capacity, assign books by like Black women. Like there's so much that students can gain from reading Black women writers. Oh wait, what was I gonna say? I forgot the last bit.
We've been
Anyway, that's it.
we've been
Oh, my
drinking.
newsletter. Oh,
Yes.
I started a weekly-ish newsletter. It's called Part and Parcel. Substack.com. Follow it, read it. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with it. I want to find my voice, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm having fun with it so far. So subscribe. I'd love to pop into your news box every Sunday, or your inbox every Sunday.
Fantastic. Your news box. I like that. We were drinking. Brendan, tell us about your work. Tell us about where to find you.
My work. So the next thing that I have coming is did a podcast episode with the podcast Sapiens, which is an anthropology magazine that looks at the condition of what it means to be human.
Wow.
I interviewed a woman here in Baltimore, Miss Jerry Hutton Green, whose mother was murdered, and she's faced subsequent Baltimore City police violence.
Wow.
I interview her. We talk about the struggles of what it means to be unheard as a Black woman when we face different kinds of violences. That's like the centralness of my work, is thinking across gender, thinking across affect, and thinking about violence with Blackness. So that's why I'm always reading stuff like, okay, where's the violence?
Yeah.
Where's the political? And then in 2 weeks, I'm doing a lecture on some of my research, where I'm trying to think about why we don't remember Black women who've been killed by police and interpersonal
Mm-hmm.
violence in the same way that we
Mm-hmm.
remember and memorialize Black men. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think about the Black maternal, I think about structural violence and its impact on how we actually value the lives of Black trans and cis women. So that's coming up, and if you want to learn more about that, I am going to post on my page soon, as soon as I get myself together to do it. But hopefully, in a few months, we'll see the announcement that the doctor is a real thing.
Yes.
And I'll be on the other side of that, so that's something that I'm looking forward to.
You got this, friend. You got this, friend.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
Forrest.
Thank you.
Drop some information.
So season 2 of Favorite Librarian, the podcast, is out.
Uh-huh.
For that. You can still find me anywhere on Instagram, and pray for me that I earn or at least get a nomination for a sports Emmy. I'm hoping for that. Yeah. As you guys know, I work for Warner Brother Discovery and post-production tech, for science tech and sports, So pray for me. That's what goals this year.
Fingers
Y'all so
crossed.
cool. Y'all so interesting. I just love being around such interesting Black women. I'm just so excited. On this Trans Day of Visibility, I want to also say to all my homies, my sibs, my friends, my kin, my comrades, I see you. I love you. We are here. I'm glad that you are here and that you are breathing. I have so much gratitude for your life and your presence. Happy very last day of International Women's History Month. I hope that we have all been thoughtful and intentional about this month and understand that it's not just in March, it's like all the time that we are human beings and should be acknowledged as such. And I love y'all and I'm grateful for y'all. I'm super tipsy, so this was fun. I'm
Thank
proud of
you.
myself.
Bring us back. Thank you, Jen, for the
Yes.
invitation as
Oh,
well.
tipsy.
Like, this was so
Whew.
nice.
Y'all seem way soberer than me. Oh, I'm cross-stated.
That's about to
That's
change.
why I was smoking.
I'm about to go roll.
Yeah, y'all be good. I hope y'all
It's
have a
tequila
beautiful
time.
weekend.
You
I hope
too.
All my
y'all have
love.
wonderful, lovely people around you that pour into you and restore you. All right? Y'all be good.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good
Bye.
night. Bye.